A disabled millionaire's son must marry within a week to keep his inheritance, but when he meets a girl on a blind date, she changes everything. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the towering windows of the Prescott mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Despite its grandeur, the house felt cold, a reflection of the strained relationships within. Nathaniel Nate Prescott stood by the fireplace, his hands clenched into fists as he glared at the man seated before him, his father, Victor Prescott. Victor, wheelchair-bound and wearing his signature icy expression, looked unbothered by the fury radiating from his son. Beside him stood Mr. Aldridge, his lawyer, who adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat as he opened a leather folder. "Nathaniel," Mr. Aldridge began, his tone professional but firm, "as per your father's revised will, there is a clause regarding the inheritance of the Prescott Tate." Nate rolled his eyes, his frustration evident. "Get on with it," he snapped. Mr. Aldridge hesitated for a moment before continuing. "You must be married by your 29th birthday to secure the inheritance. Since your birthday is a week from today, that gives you precisely 7 days to fulfill the condition. If you fail to do so, the entirety of the estate will be donated to charity." The room fell silent, the weight of the ultimatum settling heavily in the air. Nate stared at the lawyer, then at his father, his disbelief quickly turning into anger. "This is insane," Nate exploded, pacing back and forth. "You can't dictate my life like this. Marriage isn't something you can just rush into, especially not to keep some stupid inheritance." Victor's expression remained impassive as he spoke, his voice sharp and cold. "It's not just about the money, Nathaniel. It's about proving that you can take responsibility for something other than yourself, that you're capable of making a serious commitment." Nate stopped pacing, his eyes blazing with resentment. "You think this is about responsibility? This is about control. You've been trying to control my life ever since I was a kid." Victor's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "And look how well you've done without it. Running around with no purpose, no ambition, living off the Prescott name. Do you think that's what your mother would have wanted for you?" At the mention of his late mother, Nate's jaw tightened, his anger threatening to boil over. "Don't you dare bring her into this," he said through gritted teeth. Mr. Aldridge, sensing the tension escalating, interjected. "Gentlemen, perhaps we could discuss this more calmly." "No." Nate cut him off, turning to his father. "You've had it out for me ever since the accident. You blame me for what happened, don't you?" Victor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of pain flashing across his face before his steely composure returned. "This isn't about the accident," he said, his tone colder than ever. "This is about you proving that you're not just a spoiled brat who's never worked for anything in his life. Consider this your last chance to show me you're serious about the family legacy." Nate laughed bitterly, throwing up his hands. "And if I don't jump through your hoops, what then? You'd rather give everything away to strangers than let me have it." Victor leaned forward slightly, his voice low but cutting. "If you can't meet this simple condition, then yes. Because I won't leave the Prescott legacy in the hands of someone who refuses to grow up." Nate felt his chest tighten, his father's words cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. He turned away, staring out the window at the sprawling estate that had been his home and prison for as long as he could remember. "I don't need your money," he said finally, his voice quieter but still laced with defiance. "I can walk away from all of this and be just fine." Victor chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound. "Then do it. Walk away. But we both know you won't. Because deep down you care about this family and its legacy more than you're willing to admit." Nate said nothing, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Mr. Aldridge glanced between the two men, clearly uncomfortable. "Nathaniel, you have 7 days to make your decision. If you choose to proceed, I recommend taking action immediately." With that, the lawyer closed his folder and excused himself, leaving father and son in tense silence. Later that evening, Nate sat in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey, as he recounted the day's events to his best friend, Ethan. "This whole thing is a joke," Nate muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. "How am I supposed to find someone to marry in 7 days? Ethan, lounging on the couch with a casual smirk, shrugged. "You've got money, charm, well, sort of, and access to pretty much anyone. It's not impossible." Nate shot him a withering look. "I'm not buying a wife, Ethan. This isn't a business transaction." Okay, fair enough," Ethan said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Then, a mischievous glint appeared in his eyes. "What about blind dates?" Nate groaned. "You can't be serious." "Think about it," Ethan said, leaning forward. We set up a few dates with women who might actually like you. Crazy, I know, and you only need one yes. Worst case, you get some good stories out of it. Best case, you find someone who doesn't hate your guts. Nate swirled his drink, considering the idea. It was ridiculous, desperate, and completely outside his comfort zone. But as the weight of the ultimatum loomed over him, he realized he didn't have many options. Fine, he said reluctantly. Set it up. But if this goes south, I'm blaming you. Ethan grinned, raising his glass in a mock toast. Don't worry, buddy. By the end of this, you'll be thanking me. Nate drained his whiskey, the tension in his chest momentarily easing. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but one thing was certain. The next 7 days were about to change his life in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. The quiet of the mansion at night was almost suffocating. Nathaniel Nate Prescott sat alone in his study, the glow of a single desk lamp illuminating the stacks of unopened mail and business documents that had accumulated over the months. The room was heavy with the scent of leather and aged wood, but Nate found no comfort in its familiar opulence. He stared into his glass of whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the light. His father's words from earlier echoed in his mind, each one sharper than the last. You're a spoiled brat. You've had years to prove yourself. This is your last chance. The anger that had burned so fiercely during their confrontation had dimmed, leaving behind a hollow ache. Victor Prescott had always been a demanding man, but the accident 10 years ago had hardened him into someone nearly unrecognizable. Nate clenched his jaw at the memory. It had been a rainy night, and they'd argued over what he could hardly remember now. His father, insisting on driving, had lost control of the car. Nate had walked away with minor injuries, but Victor had never walked again. From that day forward, Victor's disappointment in his son seemed to deepen. No matter what Nate did, it was never enough. And though Nate hated to admit it, the old man's opinion still mattered. The next morning, Ethan barged into Nate's study with his usual carefree energy, carrying a tablet and a mischievous grin. All right, buddy, Ethan announced, plopping down on the couch. Operation Find a Wife is officially underway. Nate looked up from his desk, already regretting his decision to involve his best friend. This feels like a terrible idea. Well, it's not like you have a lot of options, Ethan retorted, scrolling through his tablet. Unless you plan to start speed dating at the nearest coffee shop, this is as good as it gets. Ethan had enlisted the help of a high-end matchmaking service, promising to filter out the gold diggers and focus on women who might genuinely connect with Nate. But as the first few dates unfolded, it became clear that reality was far messier than Ethan's optimism. The first date was with Veronica, a socialite with impeccable style and a laugh that grated on Nate's nerves within minutes. She spent the evening talking about her designer wardrobe and upcoming vacations, pausing only to ask Nate pointed questions about his net worth. So, Nathaniel, Veronica purred, twirling her wine glass. How many cars do you own? And do you prefer penthouses or private villas? Nate forced a polite smile, mentally counting the seconds until the date ended. The second date wasn't much better. Lindsay, an aspiring influencer, spent more time taking selfies and filming their dinner than actually speaking to Nate. This is so fun, Lindsay exclaimed, holding her phone out for a selfie. Smile, Nathaniel, my followers are going to love this. Nate barely resisted the urge to groan. By the time the fourth date rolled around, Nate was ready to give up entirely. Each encounter felt more transactional than the last, a painful reminder that many people only saw his wealth and not the man behind it. Late that evening, Nate and Ethan sat in the living room, the remnants of Chinese takeout scattered on the coffee table. Okay, I'll admit, Ethan said, leaning back with a sheepish grin, maybe this hasn't gone as smoothly as I thought. Nate glared at him. Understatement of the century. If I have to listen to one more person ask about my bank account, I'm out. Ethan held up his hands in mock surrender. Relax. I've got one more setup for you. And I promise she's not like the others. Nate raised an eyebrow, skeptical. How do you know? Because Ethan said, his tone uncharacteristically serious, she doesn't even know who you are. No background checks, no fancy introductions. Just a normal blind date. Think of it as your last shot. Nate sighed, running a hand through his hair. He hated how desperate this made him feel, but the thought of walking away from his inheritance, and more importantly, his father's respect, was unbearable. All right, he said finally, one more. But if this goes south, I'm done. Ethan grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. You won't regret it. Nate wasn't so sure. As he stared out the window at the sprawling estate, a sense of dread settled in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that the next few days would change everything, for better or worse. Sophia Carter adjusted the hem of her simple navy blue dress and glanced at her reflection in the mirror. Her auburn hair framed her face in soft waves, and her green eyes held a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She sighed, grabbing her coat from the back of the chair. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. From across the room, Lila, her roommate, spun around on her desk chair with a mischievous grin. "No, this is an adventure," she corrected. "It's a blind date. Think of it as research. You work with people all day, you're practically an expert." "Research?" Sophia raised an eyebrow. "I'm a social worker, not a case study subject. And you're the one who signed me up for this. Blind dates are so awkward." Lila shrugged, unbothered. "Well, you've been single for way too long, and I'm tired of hearing you talk about work all the time. Go have fun. Worst case scenario, you get free coffee and an awkward story to tell." Sophia rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling at her roommate's enthusiasm. "Fine. But if this guy turns out to be a total jerk, I'm holding you responsible." Nate Prescott sat at a small table in the corner of a quiet cafe, nursing a black coffee and scrolling through his phone. He glanced up at the clock on the wall, irritated by how slowly the minutes passed. Blind dates weren't his idea of a good time, but Ethan had insisted, and Nate was too worn down to argue. When the bell above the door chimed, Nate looked up, expecting another polished, overly styled woman with an agenda. Instead, he saw Sophia. She paused at the entrance, her eyes scanning the room before settling on him. Her modest dress, sensible shoes, and warm but unassuming demeanor were a stark contrast to the women Nate had met before. Sophia approached the table, offering a polite smile. "Nathaniel?" "Just Nate," he replied, standing to shake her hand. Her grip was firm, her gaze steady, not flirtatious, not calculating, just normal. "I'm Sophia," she said, taking a seat. They ordered drinks, the conversation starting awkwardly. Nate studied her, trying to figure out her angle. She wasn't fawning over him or trying to impress him, which made him oddly curious. After a moment of silence, he leaned back and smirked. "Let me guess, you're here for the money too?" Sophia raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Excuse me? If I wanted money, I'd be at a job interview, not a blind date." Nate blinked, caught off guard by her sharp response. "I didn't mean." "Sure you did," Sophia interrupted, her tone light but pointed. "And you clearly have a high opinion of yourself. Great start." For the first time in a while, Nate found himself at a loss for words. Most people would have laughed nervously or tried to explain themselves, but Sophia seemed entirely unbothered. "Okay, I deserve that," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not exactly a pro at this whole dating thing." "That's obvious," Sophia said, her lips curving into a small, teasing smile. Despite himself, Nate chuckled. "Fair enough. So, what's your deal? Why'd you agree to this?" Sophia shrugged. "My roommate thought it would be fun. She said I spend too much time working and not enough time living." "What do you do?" "I'm a social worker," she said. "I help connect families to resources, advocate for foster kids, that sort of thing." Nate raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. "That sounds exhausting." "It can be," Sophia admitted, taking a sip of her coffee. "But it's worth it. What about you?" Nate hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I'm in business," he said vaguely. Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing his evasion, but she let it slide. As the conversation continued, Nate found himself lowering his guard. Sophia wasn't like the others. She didn't interrupt to talk about herself or drop hints about his wealth. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions, listened intently, and even made him laugh with her dry wit. For her part, Sophia was intrigued by the glimpses of vulnerability she saw in Nate. Beneath his polished exterior and guarded tone, there was something raw, something human. She sensed that he carried a weight he didn't know how to let go of, and it made her curious despite herself. After nearly an hour, Sophia glanced at her watch and stood, grabbing her coat. "Leaving already?" Nate asked, surprised by the pang of disappointment he felt. "I have an early morning," Sophia said, her tone polite but firm. She hesitated for a moment, then looked him in the eye. "You're not what I expected, but I'm not sure that's a good thing." Before Nate could respond, she was gone, the door chiming softly behind her. He sat there for a moment staring after her, her words replayed in his mind, a challenge wrapped in mystery. For the first time in a long time, Nate felt something other than cynicism. He felt intrigued. Sophia Carter stood by the counter of the community center where she worked, sifting through a pile of paperwork. The facility was woefully underfunded, and she spent most of her evenings strategizing ways to secure grants or donors. It was a never-ending battle, but one she fought willingly. The bell on the center's front door jingled, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked up and froze. Nathaniel Prescott stood there, looking distinctly out of place in his tailored coat and polished shoes. "Nate?" she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure of how to start, before walking toward her with determined steps. "I need to talk to you." Sophia folded her arms, her eyebrows raised. "About what? Another blind date etiquette lesson?" Nate winced but pressed on. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but hear me out." She sighed, leaning against the counter. "I'm listening." Nate took a deep breath, clearly uncomfortable. "I need your help. My father's lawyer dropped this ridiculous condition on me. I have to be married within a week to secure my inheritance." Sophia's expression turned skeptical. "And this involves me how?" "I want you to marry me," he said plainly. The room fell silent. Sophia blinked, then let out a disbelieving laugh. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's not as bad as it sounds," Nate said quickly. "It would just be for a year. No strings attached. I'll pay off your student loans and donate a significant amount to your community center. Think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement." Sophia stared at him, incredulous. "You think you can just buy people's lives because you're rich?" "No, thank you." "It's not just about money," Nate said, his voice quieter now. "I need someone I can trust. And for some reason I think that's you." Sophia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She wasn't sure what stunned her more, his audacity or the vulnerability she saw in his eyes. "You're serious," she said finally. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't," Nate replied. "Look, I know this is unconventional, but it's a win-win. You get the funding you need, and I get to keep my inheritance." Sophia shook her head, stepping away from him. "This isn't a business deal, Nate. Marriage is, it's personal, it's sacred. You can't just throw money at it and expect everything to work out." "I know it's not ideal," Nate said, frustration creeping into his voice. "But I'm running out of options. And I think we could make this work for both of us." Sophia stared at him for a long moment before responding, her voice firm. "I'm sorry, Nate. The answer is no." That evening, Sophia sat on the couch in her apartment, recounting the bizarre encounter to Lila. "He offered to pay off my loans and fund the center," Sophia said, still shaking her head in disbelief. "All I have to do is marry him for a year." Lila leaned forward, her eyes wide. "And you said no?" "Of course I did," Sophia replied. "It's insane. Marriage isn't supposed to be some transactional arrangement." Lila tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "I get that, but think about what you could do with that money. The center could finally expand. You could help so many more people." Sophia frowned, conflicted. "But at what cost? Selling my integrity." "It's not like he's asking you to actually fall in love with him," Lila pointed out. "It's just a year. And from what you've said, he's not a bad guy. A little arrogant, maybe, but not awful." Sophia sighed, resting her head in her hands. She couldn't deny that the offer was tempting. Her financial struggles were a constant weight on her shoulders, and the thought of being able to make real, lasting change in her community was hard to ignore. "I don't know," she said finally. "It just feels wrong." Lila placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to decide right now. But think about it, Soph. This could be the opportunity you've been waiting for." The next day, Sophia found herself walking the familiar path to the community center, Nate's words still echoing in her mind. When she arrived, she was greeted by the usual chaos. Kids running around, parents signing up for programs, and volunteers rushing to meet demands. As she sat at her desk, staring at the growing stack of unpaid bills, she made a decision. Later that evening, Sophia met Nate at a small, quiet restaurant. He looked surprised to see her but quickly masked it with his usual calm demeanor. "Changed your mind?" he asked. "I have conditions," Sophia said, cutting straight to the point. Nate leaned back, intrigued. "I'm listening." "No physical intimacy," Sophia said firmly. "Complete honesty, and this ends after a year, no extensions, no complications." Nate nodded, agreed. "And," she added, her eyes narrowing, "I want everything in writing, no loopholes." "Done," Nate said, pulling out his phone. "I'll have my lawyer draft something tonight." Sophia took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "I still think this is crazy," she admitted. Nate smiled faintly. "Probably, but sometimes crazy works." The next day they signed the agreement in the presence of lawyers. As Sophia walked out of the office, the weight of her decision settled over her. This is just a deal, she told herself, nothing more. But deep down she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. And neither could Nate. The days after their marriage were a whirlwind of adjustments. Sophia moved into Nate's sprawling townhouse, and while the house itself was immaculate, their arrangement was anything but. The first morning, Sophia walked into the sleek, modern kitchen to find Nate pouring coffee, dressed in a tailored suit. He glanced up briefly. "Good morning," he said, his tone polite but distant. "Morning," Sophia replied, equally reserved. The silence stretched as they awkwardly navigated sharing the space. For the first few weeks, their conversations were transactional, revolving around schedules, public appearances, and the mechanics of their agreement. "This isn't so bad," Sophia joked one evening as they sat across from each other at the dining table, eating takeout. "Not yet," Nate replied with a wry smile. "Wait until the press gets wind of it." They shared a small laugh, but the walls between them remained firmly in place. One night, Sophia found Nate in his office, staring at a framed photo of his father. She hesitated at the door before stepping in. "You okay?" she asked gently. Nate glanced at her, his expression conflicted. "I was just thinking my dad wasn't always like this. Before the accident he was different." Sophia sat down across from him, her gaze steady. "Have you ever told him that?" Nate frowned. "What's the point? He doesn't listen." "Maybe he would," Sophia suggested. "Or maybe it's just something you need to say for yourself." Her words lingered in Nate's mind long after she left the room. The next day, he visited Victor, their conversation tense but revealing. For the first time in years, Nate began to see his father as more than just a critical voice, but as a man shaped by his own pain and regrets. Sophia, meanwhile, poured herself into her work, balancing her responsibilities at the community center with her new role as Nate's wife. Though she kept her personal life private, her passion for helping others drew Nate's attention. One evening, he accompanied her to a fundraiser for the community center. Sophia stood at the podium, addressing a crowd of donors with a mix of poise and fervor. "These children need more than just a roof over their heads," she said, her voice steady. "They need hope, opportunities, and people who believe in them. Together we can give them a future worth fighting for." As the crowd erupted into applause, Nate felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. He had always seen Sophia as pragmatic and independent, but now he realized how deeply she cared for others, and how much he admired her for it. Later, as they mingled with the guests, Sophia accidentally spilled a glass of champagne on Nate's jacket. "Oh no," she exclaimed, grabbing a napkin. "I'm so sorry." Nate laughed, surprising her. "It's fine. I've survived worse." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the noise of the room faded away. Sophia felt her cheeks flush, and Nate's expression softened. "You're amazing, you know that?" he said quietly. Sophia opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, they were interrupted by another guest. Still, the moment lingered in both their minds. As their connection deepened, Victor began to grow suspicious. He hired a private investigator who uncovered the truth about their arrangement. One evening, Nate returned from a meeting with Victor, his face pale and his jaw tight. Sophia was in the living room, reading, and looked up in concern. "What happened?" she asked. "He knows," Nate said bluntly. Sophia's heart sank. "How?" "Private investigator," Nate replied, running a hand through his hair. "He thinks I manipulated you into this. He doesn't believe us." Sophia stared at him, her emotions swirling. "What did you say?" Nate turned to her, his eyes earnest. "I told him the truth, that I care about you. That this might have started as a deal, but it's not just that anymore." Sophia felt her breath catch. "Nate." Before she could say more, Nate crossed the room and took her hands in his. "I know this wasn't what either of us expected," he said softly. "But I'm not pretending anymore. I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but before she could respond, Nate's phone buzzed. It was Victor. "You'd better prove it." Victor's voice came through, gruff and skeptical. "Because if she's the one, you can't afford to mess this up." Nate ended the call, his resolve hardening. "He doesn't believe in us, but I don't care. I just need to know one thing. Do you?" Sophia hesitated, her heart pounding. She didn't answer right away, leaving Nate with the unsettling realization that for the first time in his life, he was truly vulnerable. Sophia paced the length of the living room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Nate stood by the window, his face a mixture of frustration and guilt. "So, let me get this straight," Sophia said, her voice steady but sharp. "Your father hired someone to dig into our arrangement, and instead of telling me, you let me find out from Ethan." Nate turned to face her, his jaw tightening. "I didn't want to drag you into it. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Sophia's laugh was bitter. "From what? The truth? Or from the fact that this whole thing was built on lies?" Nate took a step toward her, his expression softening. "It wasn't a lie, Sophia. Not anymore. You have to know that." Sophia shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know what to believe, Nate. From the start, this was just a transaction for you. How am I supposed to trust anything you say now?" Nate's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he looked as if he might give up. But then he stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "I was a fool," he admitted. "I treated our marriage like a business deal because I was scared of failing, scared of my father, scared of you." "Me?" Sophia asked, incredulous. "Yes, you," Nate said, his voice breaking slightly. "You're everything I'm not, selfless, passionate, real. I didn't know how to handle that, so I hid behind the deal. But I'm not hiding anymore." Sophia's breath caught, but she didn't respond, her emotions swirling too fast to pin down. The next morning, Nate sat in his father's study, the tension between them thick. "Well?" Victor asked, his piercing gaze fixed on his son. Nate straightened his shoulders. "I love her," he said simply, "and I don't care what the will says. I'm not letting her go." Victor was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk. "What's this?" Nate asked, frowning. "Read it?" Victor said. Nate opened the folder, scanning the document inside. His eyes widened as he reached the bottom. The inheritance was never at risk. Victor nodded, his expression softening. "It was a test, Nathaniel. Not about money or marriage, but about you. I needed to know if you could grow up, take responsibility, and care about something, or someone, other than yourself." Nate clenched his fist, torn between anger and gratitude. "So you manipulated me." "Us." Victor's gaze didn't waver. "And it worked, didn't it? You proved me wrong. Now go prove yourself to her." That evening, Sophia arrived at the community center to find it transformed. The drab walls were adorned with string lights, and tables filled with flowers lined the room. Children from the center ran around excitedly, and the staff greeted her with knowing smiles. "What's going on?" Sophia asked, confused. "Come and see," Leela said, appearing at her side and guiding her toward the main hall. There, standing under a canopy of lights, was Nate, holding a small velvet box. He looked nervous but determined as she approached. "Sophia," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Our first deal was a mistake. I treated you like a solution to my problem, and I was wrong. You're not a deal. You're my heart, my future, my everything." Sophia felt tears welling up, but she didn't speak, letting him continue. "I don't deserve you, but I'm asking anyway," Nate said, dropping to one knee. "Let's make a new deal, one for forever. Will you marry me? For real this time." Sophia stared at him, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath, her lips trembling into a smile. "You don't have to buy me, Nate. You already have me." The room erupted in cheers as she reached down to pull him to his feet, their embrace warm and full of promise. Months later, the community center was packed for their wedding. Friends, family, and the people Sophia had worked so hard to help filled the room, their joy palpable. Victor, seated at the head table, raised his glass during the toast. "To my son Nate and my new daughter, Sophia," he began, his voice uncharacteristically warm. "Nate, you've shown me that you're not just capable, you're extraordinary. And Sophia, thank you for teaching us all what it means to love selflessly." As glasses clinked and laughter filled the room, Nate and Sophia shared a quiet moment on the dance floor. "Do you think your dad finally approves?" Sophia teased. Nate smiled, spinning her gently. "Who cares? All that matters is you." And as they danced under the glow of the lights, surrounded by love and laughter, they knew they had found something far greater than any inheritance, each other. As the camera lingers on Nate and Sophia sharing a quiet, joyful dance, surrounded by their loved ones and the community they've helped, the scene fades into a warm, golden glow. Life often surprises us, taking us on journeys we never expected. Nate and Sophia's story reminds us of the transformative power of love, trust, and second chances. What started as a contract became something real, proving that when we open our hearts, anything is possible. If this story touched you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves stories of hope and redemption. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales that remind us of the beauty of life and love. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.